Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever it is that you are and wherever you may be. Thank you very much for making us a part of your day. I am Brad Franklin, a creative content writer here in Chesterfield. I'm very glad to tell you that Chesterfield Behind the Mic is on the air once again. One of the great things about doing this show is I get to learn a lot through the course of bringing in different guests from a variety of different departments, different backgrounds, different points of view. And I'm really excited to sort of do this one because this is one that I'm very curious about, and I think a lot of you out there probably will be too. First off, I want to welcome Nick Feucht, who is the Real Estate and Housing Coordinator with the Department of Community Enhancement. Nick, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me today.
I am very glad to have you, very glad for you to be here and talk to us about housing and a lot of different things around housing and what community enhancement does. Before we get into that, I want to start with a little bit about your background. I always like to try to give people a chance, if they're listening to the show, watching the show on YouTube, to get a feel for who they're hearing from. And so I want to talk a little about sort of what was your background prior to coming to work here in Chesterfield with your department. What brought you here? How did you sort of arrive? Before we get into the nuts and bolts of what you actually do, how is it that you sort of landed in Chesterfield?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, to start really at the beginning, I'm not too far into my career, but I've always been interested in public service. I grew up in a really small town, kind of town that there were two stoplights and they were never not the same color.
I know that life well.
And in the town that I grew up in, the mayor had mentioned to me between semesters of college that being a city manager he thought was a really interesting job. Uh-huh. And then when I was in college, I was studying economics and really interested in how just economists pull out what is happening in the world and put it into kind of a mathematical model.
Right.
And randomly kind of ran into urban planning. Okay. And thought that's just really fascinating how we have spent trillions of dollars and centuries building our society and where we live and what we play and everything. Right. Just kind of how things interact. Right. So I was really interested in kind of that intersection of local government and what is actually happening and how do we know that. And when I was in my third year at UVA, the gentleman who started the Weather Channel, Mr. Frank Batten, gave the school an enormous gift to endow a new school of public policy. Right. And I happened to be in the first cohort there, so kind of just got by sheer luck in the right place at the right time.
Right place, right time, yep.
And so I did an accelerated master's program there. Okay. And while I was in grad school, I also worked for the city government of Charlottesville. Gotcha. Which is a very unique place, unlike I'm sure many other places. Just it's very small. It's surrounded by a much larger locality. Right. And then when I graduated, it was the beginning of the recession, and it was a tough time to find a job. But I managed to find a job in Richmond, which is about an hour from where I grew up, and I started a job there with the deputy city manager for economic development planning, housing, those kinds of things. Right. And I was there for about 10 years, and I was really interested just generally in how cities work and work well, because most people in the world live in a city. Right. And I thought if you can figure out ways to make just things function better, there's an enormous upside for, lots and lots and lots of people. Right. And so I did a lot of different things when I was there in the city, kind of in those different realms. Right. But then in this country, most people don't necessarily live in a city. They live in a place like Chesterfield. Right. Yeah. And so I really wanted to get some more experience just in a more, a different model of government and different model of a built environment, that kind of thing. And so in 2020, in the beginning of the pandemic, I seem to make big moves during tough times.
The next time you're like buying a house, you let the rest of us know so we can plan ahead. Okay?
Yeah, there'll be an asteroid in the sky. So I came here and took a job with the Department of Community Enhancement, which is a relatively new department, doing real estate and housing type things, community development, and things like that. And again, the same thing is like there's a major upside. I mean, everyone who lives in Chesterfield knows there's a lot of opportunity here and a lot of quality of life things that are major assets for us. Right. So there's a major upside in figuring out how to do that and do that well. Right. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. Hopefully I'll have more to say by the time I retire.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, in terms of the department, I find this really interesting because I feel like if you ask somebody what does community enhancement do, they could probably spend a significant amount of time just talking about one of the many sort of prongs, if you will, right? I don't know that there are many departments in the county that encapsulates so many different things on such a different sort of scale, if that makes sense. Tell me, just let's look at it this way. How would you sort of explain or describe what your department does? What are some of the sort of tentpole pieces of what community enhancement does?
Yeah, this is my colleagues are going to nail me down if I don't get this correct. But we have a couple different groups, and I think if you put it in a nutshell, you could say we try to make the county look nice, stay looking nice. So we do a variety of code enforcements and cleanups.
Right.
And we also have recently added a guy who does a lot of compliance work and make sure that the landfills are doing what they need to do. So that's kind of making it smell nice. But we also have a small team that does the administration of federal funds. So funds that come from the federal government every year that are used to help people who are low to mod income with either some basic services like emergency food or rent assistance or things like that, but also a lot of home repair, and I'll talk about that later, and building housing that's affordable for our workforce, teachers, our sheriffs, police officers, people like that, and more. So we do a fair amount of that kind of stuff. We interact with the public quite a bit. And in the best ways, it's people that are interested in coming together and kind of cleaning up their neighborhood and how can we get started and how can we help. In maybe the worst way, it's when we've got to deal with a severely blighted property that has been sitting for a while and a real concern. So, all of that's important, and it takes time and different tools and techniques. And we've got a variety of people with those skill sets and also just different ways of delivering the end product. So it's a good group. Yeah.
Now, real estate and housing coordinator, how would you describe what that role means? What would you say your I don't mean to quote Office Space here. What would you say you do
Great
here?
Movie.
But in terms of what does a real estate and housing coordinator do?
Yeah, so my role has been like everybody during the pandemic, it meant certain things, and we're kind of getting out of just emergency assistance to help people stay in their homes and things like that. Now it's shifting a bit more to actual, what are the ways we can help with real estate development that help some of our, low to mod income communities. Also, what do we do when a group in the community has a piece of real estate that they're interested in? Maybe it's an old church or another old building, and the use of that building is no longer relevant for the time that we're in, and they're trying to revision what they do. So there's a couple projects where I'm at the very beginning, just kind of helping people as a non-financially involved party. Just what do you got to do here? What's this process like? Some of that is a bit like aim for the clouds, but also keeping feet on the ground.
Yeah, gotcha.
So we also do things that are very, smaller and much bigger, and those deal with just helping get homes repaired for people. And you can think, in some sense, keeping a person in a home is also keeping a person within their community, within their networks for how they get groceries, how they go to the doctor, those kinds of things. So, of the limited money we have, sometimes the best dollar spent is doing these kind of rehab programs and things like that. But now that we're kind of out of the pandemic and we're, I'm not doing as much with federal funds that were provided then, I'm pivoting more towards dealing with blighted properties. So these are properties that they're not necessarily tax delinquent, but they have been left behind due to, who knows what kind of tangled ownership, those kinds of things. But they're falling down. They're a threat to other people, and they could be, occupied housing, which is what the county wants. We want to make sure our housing is safe, secure, and occupied by somebody.
For sure.
And so I'll be doing a bit more of that, and then just trying to build this kind of pipeline of projects that are going to be helpful to the community. And so we're at the beginning of all of those. And those are really getting a group to coalesce, helping them vision, do some outreach, get buy-in from the neighbors and other partners, and then, phase out a project and, just make sure they keep going, even though, one phase may be harder than another.
Now, in terms of the bigger picture, how would you what's the best way to frame the way that economic development, or I guess that community development, fits into the larger sort of economic development landscape, so to speak?
Yeah. So, if I were to paint the Mona Lisa with a broad brush, here's maybe an easy way to conceptualize it. A lot of times you could think of, and an easy way to think of as a major economic development project is something really large that comes and has major trickle-down effects for an area. So, there's a building that's going to get built and local construction jobs made from that, and then there'll be local supplier jobs and people that work at the facility, and on and on and on. And, you definitely need those.
Right.
And those projects provide a lot of spin-off. But community development maybe is starting at the other end. You have a neighborhood that has seen disinvestment or is struggling to kind of, just keep things clean and tidy.
Yeah.
Or, we're looking for a restaurant. What can we do to get a restaurant and a doctor's office or a pharmacy back?
Right.
And so a lot of times the beginning there is getting a group together to coalesce, finding your anchors and doing some smaller things that are immediate but visible and help people feel like, hey, we're making some progress here. Whether that's cleaning up or tree plantings or helping your neighbors get fences painted and things like that. Those kinds of things are really important for just like getting going. And once you have that kind of set up and moving forward, you can do other stuff with home repair. Maybe you target home repair so you get lots of homes fixed in a neighborhood, and you bring other nonprofits in that can help bring some volunteers in.
Right.
And those things can really make a difference for, somebody will say, hey, we're going to put our bakery here, or we're going to put our coffee shop, we're going to put our pizza shop here, we're going to have the taco stand here. Somebody will make some initial investment that is commercial in nature. And then people will start building houses on maybe infill, and you really start getting people to notice like, oh, I remember this area, it looked like people had just passed it over or left it behind.
Right. And now it seems to be coming to life again.
And a lot of that is inspiring people that are already there to, that you can do, just like reaffirming you are able to do this and you can do this and we're here to help give you that message. A lot of times it doesn't really involve that much other outside resources or things like that.
Right.
And I think that really sets the stage, 5-10 years later, major employers are now like, this is the kind of place where we can get a workforce. The quality of life is such, and we're really interested in that. And you kind of back your way into the other, but you need both.
Yeah.
And anyone that tells you like, it's weird in the world of community development, economic development, I feel like sometimes people root for one or the other, like it's a sports team. And I know today's major sporting event, but you do need both, and they're not playing in the same game. Maybe they're, one is freestyle and the other is backstroke.
Gotcha.
You need people on both those teams to get to, that successful outcome. But it's hard, I don't know, it's hard being in the middle and trying to say both things at the same time.
Well, and it's like, and the more you talked about it, the more I was thinking like in the world, in this world, it's almost like community enhancement is the curb appeal of trying to sell a house. If you think about it, right? That the house itself is not devoid of everything around it, right? If you have a nice piece of property, right? In part, it's nice because of things other than just literally what is in the house, right? You can have a great house, but if it's sitting on a property and everything around it does not match that. So I think which seems like what you're trying to describe is like the concert, right? The fusion, whatever the buzzword might be, between sort of the larger sort of economic development picture and the way that community enhancement really has to work with that in order for all sides to really sort of achieve. Now, in terms of housing, let's talk a little bit about that. There seems to be a lot of focus on that in recent years, in part, I think, because of so many, pandemic related pressures that came from that sort of time frame. And I feel like in some ways people are more focused on housing now than maybe they used to be, if that makes any sense. Can you tell me a little bit about sort of the housing situation in general in Chesterfield County?
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, before I should have picked an easier topic for my first time on than housing. Housing is one of those things where everyone has experience with this. Right. We have all lived somewhere. It's incredibly emotional. It's very personal. We have so many memories that are attached to where we lived, who lived around us.
Right.
So it can be a very tough topic to have a conversation about in a macro way or in a way where you're just looking at data, and there is a sea of data that is as deep as the Atlantic when it comes to housing. And I think I've been involved with housing and local government for almost 2 decades now. And I think, I can remember when the first, ramp up to the Great Recession was happening and people were, prices would go up 25% in 3 months. And, trying to wrap my head around like, well, what has changed? Literally, what has changed in the world that makes something everywhere worth more than that? And, we saw years later kind of what fed into that was just, lending to whoever, getting things signed. Now what we're faced with is we have a huge cohort. The children of the boomers are coming of age when they really would like to buy a home. Yep. And for, decades, we have not built as much housing as we were in the decades prior to kind of accommodate for them. So we have a surge of people who are very interested in buying a home, who they make enough money to afford what it typically would cost to buy land, develop it, build a structure on it. But we just, we don't have enough supply to kind of match that.
There's no inventory there.
And when there's, just a little bit of imbalance between what people want and what people are demanding, that can cause huge fluctuations in price. We saw that the other direction, 15 years ago, and now we're kind of seeing it the other way.
Right.
So, that's a kind of a snapshot. And I'll get a little bit more into, what, I've talked to a couple different realtors in Chesterfield that do a lot of work and kind of their thoughts on what's ahead. But, just with housing, it's important to remember a couple things, no two places are the same.
Right.
And so your experience in different places is going to be different. Your whole life, you're going to be living somewhere.
That's
so
right.
Whether you rent or you buy, there is going to be a cost to where you live.
Right.
And people will, I think, get caught up in, is renting better? Is owning better? And, I think we forget, like, should we be telling other people what they should be doing or not doing? And, life has different phases in it. And there are phases when you may want to own a home and mow the grass, trim the trees, clean the gutters.
Fix this, fix that.
Yeah, and there may be times when you're like, no, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So we want to just generally try to make sure in Chesterfield that we have housing available for each stage of life that our residents are in. So, for every person that's here, we want to be able to make sure you have a way of staying within your community and those networks.
Right.
And that's one thing we found out during the pandemic is people who are not able to stay connected to their network, there's a huge health risk associated with that.
Right.
So, that looks like different things at different times for different people.
Right.
You want me? I can get into kind of a few data points about the specifics.
Well, I'm actually curious because you said something there just a second ago about sort of like the health, that it actually means something to people for them to be. I'm curious, what would you say the benefits to housing are both for sort of the greater good, but then also for the individual as well?
Yeah, housing is it's such a big part of our society and our country. It's a huge part of our economy.
Right.
The county's budget is out. It's 25% of our general fund budget is going to be real estate tax revenue. So it's hugely important for the county's budgeting and operations overall. And for Chesterfield, it's one of maybe our biggest single asset is there's a high quality of life here. And a major chunk of that is people liking their neighborhood, their community, the house that they live in. I'm always struck by the number of times in this kind of work where, people say they're after housing, but in a deeper sense, what they're after is community. They want to have neighbors that they love. I mean, I'm sure you've heard this. Oh, how do you like living there? Oh, we love it. We have blank, great neighbor. They go on about that, not so much about like, look at the half bathroom. It's got an amazing mirror and vanity.
Yeah, you make those connections with other things beyond sort of where you live, but that does color your opinion of where you live.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, I think another big thing is, and this has become even more apparent in maybe the last 4 or 5 years, but the state's lead housing finance agency, Virginia Housing, what a great name. They spent a fair amount of time last year conducting a study of just the impact of housing on economic development. And it's hugely important. such that you have, major players in the state's economic development agency saying like, you got to have housing if you're going to be in the game. Like, we are not going to be competitive if employers don't have a place for workers to be.
Workers to live, right.
Yeah, and I think that gets down to this thing of, what's the biggest threat to your business? Well, the biggest threat is my workforce disappears.
Yeah.
I mean, at least until AI, where that takes us.
Yeah.
But we can hope that we are able to kind of keep this competitive advantage of having quality neighborhoods and things that are very attractive to employees.
Right.
And that really is an edge for us when we try to recruit businesses and things that live here. And I think on a personal level, people build wealth in a house, and, whether that is because you're forced to save via some part of your payment goes into, principal that you get back, or, whether you made a good investment, that wealth helps people weather the storms of just uncertainty in life. Someone loses a job, someone gets sick, they're able to tap into something that is really stabilizing. And that's, something we want to make sure our citizens have, right? In a collective way, we are thinking, if our citizens have housing wealth, then they have stability, and that's good for the county.
Yeah. It's good for all parties, right?
Yeah. And, I saw this quote from a city manager about a month ago, but just, he was talking about how they spent $1 billion a year on K through 12 education. And he did not want the county to pursue, jobs that were not equal to that investment. He said, we're making $1 billion a year for people to learn and grow and be educated. We're not going to, we're not looking for minimum wage jobs.
Yeah,
we're looking for really technical, high skill things. And I think the same goes for our housing, right? We spent tons of money on putting our students through great schools. We want to make sure our students are coming from, stable housing so they can make the most of that investment.
Right. And that they have somewhere else then on the back end, that those students, they want to choose this community, that they have some place to live as well.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the health aspect, I don't know whether it's because I'm getting close to the top of the hill, but, those have always been there.
Right.
And I've just recently started being more and more focused on what having stable housing does for your health, and how no one wants to be sick. No one wants to have poor health status. We want to be as sharp and as physical and as active and feeling good as long as we possibly can. And so having a place that you're able to de-stress, that you are able to get out and exercise in, that you're able to just spend time in a healthy way. That's really important. And I think, you see the numbers, fewer younger people drink alcohol, that go to bed at 5:00 in the afternoon. I think health is going to be more and more of a focus, and probably we're going to see developers putting, housing developments together that maybe have some more emphasis on health as an amenity in it.
Yeah. And you mentioned investment, where you were talking about sort of investment in yourself, right? An investment sort of in your own, whether it's your own future, whether that's from a monetary standpoint, a health standpoint. That I'm curious, what are some of the direct investments that the county has made when it comes to housing, and what does the future look like on that front for the not just now but for the years to come? Yeah.
So specific to projects that we've helped out with, one thing I'll say. My department, with regards to federal funds and grant money that we've had, we are kind of at the whim of projects that come to us. And so, someone is building a, multifamily housing complex, and it's going to rent for the right price points that the funds we have, require. Then, we try to provide some funding that can help get that project over the hump and get it done. And it's been really challenging in the last 4 years because construction costs have gone up quite a bit. And so where you normally were able to spec out a project early on and those prices would still be relatively good, you're having bigger and bigger gaps. But our funds help a project have all the things it needs to have to be a good project.
Right.
So, Winchester Forest is a project that attaches to Winchester Green, and we provided some money to that one. We also have a really awesome small subdivision in Ettrick called Ettrick Landing.
Right. Yep.
And there's 4 homes that are out of the ground, and there's probably 6 more. There's 6 more to be done. So that's going to be done by the fall here. So we put a lot of time and effort. The county provided the land. We went through the rezoning. We provided grant funding to help with the infrastructure costs.
Right.
And we worked with the community to make sure that development was something that they felt like they had a stake in.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a conversation for another time. Just that took a long time, but
Mm-hmm.
if you want to go far,
sometimes that's what you got to do.
if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together.
That's right.
That's a great example of that. And we also spend millions of dollars every year rehabbing homes, and
right.
Those come in at different price points and things like that. But as everything has gone up in price, it takes more money. A roof could cost you $7,000, but if a person can stay in their home for another 10 years or longer than that, that's much cheaper than trying to build a unit of housing. And a unit of housing now, even in an apartment, you're well north of $250K per unit to get something built at this point. So, again, it comes back to that, house years per person per dollar spent, trying to make the most of it where we can. So then there are other things, we've got some other projects, but those are the kind of some visible ones people probably have seen or heard of.
Well, I think that in the big scheme of things, one of the things, like you said, you joked earlier that, we picked a pretty hefty topic to have you on here. I think what it might be, you could do a whole series of things when it comes to sort of dicing up all of the different things that community enhancement does. So we'll have to have you come back somewhere down the road and talk to us, about not just like the bigger picture, but also sort of aspects of this, because I know that there's a lot that goes into it. But Nick, I very much appreciate you coming on the program and talking to us about housing. We'll have you back again somewhere down the road.
Okay, great. Thanks for having me.
All right. Make sure you check us out on social media. On Twitter, it's at Chesterfield VA, and on Instagram, it's Chesterfield Virginia, all one word. And on Facebook, you can check out our podcast page. Just search Chesterfield Behind the Mic. Now, make sure to follow and subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Overcast, or wherever it is that you get your shows. And if you're so inclined to give us a rating or review, we greatly appreciate it. As always, a video version of our show is available on our YouTube channel, as well as on our website at Chesterfield.gov/podcast. That's also where you can submit feedback anytime, make suggestions, or just reach out to us. You can watch the show on WCCT Thursday through Sunday at 7, on the weekends at noon. That is Comcast Channel 98 and Verizon Channel 28. Lastly, check out Chesterfield.gov/connect with us to find a number of other ways to connect with Chesterfield County. My thanks to my director, Martin Stith, my executive producer, Teresa, Bonifas, and all the good folks from Constituent Media Services for all they do, and my thanks to you for joining us today. So, from all of us here in Chesterfield, thanks again for making us a part of your day. We'll see you again real soon. Take good care. From blogs to podcasts, newsletters to alerts, social media, the latest community news, our Connect With Us webpage has you covered. Chesterfield.gov/connect with us, your source for all things Chesterfield.